Today I'm going to show you how to make an improvisational applique rose. Hi, I'm Jamieson-Hirst of Chatterbox Quilts, and what I'm working on today is some projects I started, a few years ago, shall we say, and I'm not quite finished them yet. So I thought this is a perfect time to get them finished and show you how to make these roses that I'm putting on these wall hangings. So let's take a look. I've got two different samples here, so let's just take a look at what I'm talking about so you'll understand. All right, so you can see that I've got this project here. It's already all layered up and part of it's been quilted, and no, don't adjust your set. These are actually kind of wonky borders, so they are not supposed to be square, all right? So the center's square, but they're not, but the overall project is at the end. I know, it sounds a bit complicated. This is a topic for another video, so just go with me on this right now, okay? So what I've done is I've made this rose here. So you can see very simple. There's a center, and then I have just gone around it with one round in sort of a log cabin type construction. And then I have just freehand cut some green leaves that I want to add somewhere on this project, okay, somewhere around the rose. And another thing I want to point out to you, once I take these off, you'll see it even better, is that I have already free motion quilted the background. Okay, sometimes I do this with these projects because that way I can just place the appliques on them and I don't have to worry about quilting around the applique. Now I still have to quilt the borders, but I'll do that after the applique pieces are put down and finished. So that's project number one. Then I have another project, project number two, and I've got two roses on this one, a big one that's kind of magenta and this bright blue one here. And again, I've just freehand cut some leaves to put on behind there somewhere, and I'll decide where I want to put these two before I obviously stitch them down. But again, you can see that the background has been quilted on this particular one. I just find it a little easier when I'm doing applique work sometimes, depends on the project, to do that quilting first, and then I can just place the appliques wherever I want and finish them off. And then of course I'll move on and quilt the border. But let's go back to that first project, the orange one. So I've got orange with the yellow rose here. And you know, even though it doesn't really make any difference, I will fuss and fuss and fuss with this, deciding how I want it to look before I actually get it down on the project. That's just me. I tend to overthink most things. Probably the easiest way is just to kind of throw it down, and however it lands and wherever it lands is good. But anyway, we'll talk about that later. But let's talk about adding another rose to this project, maybe a smaller one. So this one, I've already picked out some fabrics. I want the yellow to be the center of this one, and then I want some blues to be around it. So I think that's going to be nice. You get the blue and orange as a complementary color scheme, so I think it'll look quite nice, and it's a good contrast with the yellow. So let's go to the sewing machine, and I'll show you how to make this other rose that we're going to add to this particular project. So the first thing I need to do is to cut that center, and you can cut it however you want. I mean, as many sides as you want. I have 4 pieces of blue fabric here, so let me think, do the math. I'm going to cut something with 4 sides. So I'm going to start at, well, let's start over here. We've already got something going on here. I don't want it to be too big. So let's go like this. Try not to overthink too much. 1, 2, 3, okay. And we'll go 4 like that. So we'll get this kind of rectangle thing going on this one. Whoops-a-daisy. Maybe it doesn't want to become a rose. I don't know. Okay, so I've got that. And then I'm going to start with this particular piece of fabric. So I'm just going to sew that. We'll say that this is the top. I'm going to sew that along the top there. So I'll just flip this over and we'll stitch it along with a 1/4 inch seam. The nice thing about these projects is if your 1/4 inch seam isn't perfect, it doesn't matter. Okay, so it's all good. So we're going to press that out like that. I can use my Violet Craft seam roller to do that. Okay, and then I want to also trim this up. I got awful lot of extra fabric here, and I do want some extra fabric. I'm not sure how much I want, so I'm going to cut it like that because I don't need that huge amount hanging off. But I also need to do some trimming here and here because we need to match the angles that are there. So I'm just going to bring up my Martelli 12 inch by 12 inch mat to do that, rather than jumping up and back and forth. So we'll just get this going here. So you're just going to line up your ruler along the angle of that center piece there, and we'll cut that off. That's one side. Now I have this other side to cut. I'm going to flip this over because it makes it easier to do it that way. And again, lining up with that. If I cut a little bit off that initial yellow piece, it doesn't really matter either. It's okay. Oops, every time I get to the seams, I have a little bit of problem. So we'll just do that. There we go. All right, so we have this triangle. It's not going to be a triangle at the end, but it's what it looks like right now. Okay, so now we need to continue adding pieces as we go around. And I tend to go in a counterclockwise motion. It doesn't really matter. You can go either way, but that's kind of how I roll. So I'm going to put this right sides together with my next piece of blue fabric and stitch that on. And in case you're wondering, I'm working with the Janome M7 sewing machine today, and I've got it set up to do 1/4 inch piecing using the setup I like the best, which is using the HP needle plate and the HP foot. There's lots of different choices on this machine, but that's the one I like to go with most of the time. Okay, so now we need to cut this off as well. Got that pressed out. You can see we need to do a little bit of trimming here at one side. Not much, just a little bit of that tip. Okay, and then we need to trim the other side of it, flipping that over again. Could do it another way. This is how I find works best for me. And then I've got some extra fabric there. And we have a lot of extra fabric here. Now I'm just going to cut this off because obviously I have no fabric in this area here, So, you know, cutting along that line there roughly is going to be okay. All right. So there we go. Now we need to add here and here. So I'm going to do that. And then that will be finished. And then I'm going to show you how we're going to trim it up to the size I want it to be and the shape I want it to be. All right. So let's take this little guy here. Put that on here. Somewhere like that. And we're going to stitch that on too. Okay, time to get that pressed away. I'm always pressing away from the seam I just sewed, the area I just sewed. I'm pressing to that new piece of fabric that I've put on. Okay, and we're going to trim again, of course. Lots of extra fabric on this one, isn't there? But having extra is better than not having enough, and you'll see that when we go to do the final trimming. Now this guy, he's got a little bit of a cut there. If you can see that, he's a little bit of a cut. So we are actually going to move this over past that on whatever angle I want it to be, because that is not going to be helpful for sure. All right, and then we've got this little guy, just a little bit, just trim off the edge here, not hardly anything at all. Okay, and then we've got this huge piece of fabric here, which we don't need that big a piece of fabric. Let's cut that down a little bit. As I said, we're going to do more trimming eventually, but for now, let's get something a little bit more manageable here. All right, so we have one more side to fill in here, right? Right, I have to go 1, 2, 3, 4, yes. It's okay to think about your projects as you're doing them. You don't want to overthink things, decisions, but you can certainly think. And now, what I'm thinking here is that I've got a bit of an issue. Just let me take a look at this for a second. Okay, we can see how this is great, but not so great there. So let's measure this up again. Let's take a little bit off here, because I want that to be a little bit, I know I'm going to have this cut at the end a little bit wider than what it is right now. As I go through doing these, I can get these off. There we go. I sometimes have to go back and do some things. So you can see this angle's coming along here, which means up to here is where I'm going to be able to cut that fabric off basically, right? Because after that I run out of fabric. So you can do a couple things. You can either change the angles on these, all right, but then you lose a lot of fabric, or, you know, we'll just go with that. You'll see that when I go to trim it up. Okay, let's get that last piece added on. All right, and you can see what I'm talking about. As you go to line this up, you can see how that would not work very well, right? I want to stitch here, and I'm going to just stitch out to the end there. Okay, so that extra fabric is definitely going to get cut off. I'm not going to do it now, but I'll do it later. But I just wanted you to see, if you couldn't, it's hard for me to explain that, but you can see that I'm just going to be stitching along here, right? It's not like I'm going to stitch up and then change direction. That's just not going to work out very well. So here we go. All right, here's our last piece here. I'm going to press that away. There we go. All right, so there's our rose. Gorgeous, isn't it? Not quite yet because it's not finished. Like I said, we have to do some trimming, and you can see we've got a lot of excess fabric around there. So trimming it should not be an issue. So let's go back to the cutting table and I'll show you how I'm going to trim this up. So here's my rose. A couple things I need to think about. Not overthinking, but I need to think about. First off, I want it to be smaller than this yellow rose that I had. So I'm kind of keeping that there to keep that in mind. The other thing is, because this is an applique, it does not have to be 4 sides. It doesn't have to be, a nice square like you do with a piece block, but it can be, whatever shape I want it to be, all right? Now, going and cutting this right away in the shape I hope I can cut it into could be a disaster, especially for me. Anyway, I'm not good with angles, okay? So instead, what I'm doing is I'm taking a friction pen and I'm going to start drawing some lines on here to give me some guidelines on where I want to cut. So if I don't like that, I can just iron it off and try another one. But let's start here. I'm going to start with this area here. I want to get most of it there. So I'm going to just draw along there with my friction pen, which hopefully I can see this one. Yes, I can see that. Okay, good. And then I'm going to come across here, something like this. Okay, I know I'm just doing some straight lines now. I'm going to change, looks like a square so far, right? But I'm going to change that in a minute. Okay, then we're going to take this down here. Okay, so let's see here. Am I getting anything smaller? It's still a little big, so maybe I'm going to have to move over here a little bit. And just kind of come down here. And then I want to do some different angles on this one. So I'm going to go here. And then I'm going to come up into this here. Let's see how that'll work. I know this is probably would be easier for someone else, but for me, not so much. So let's see. Okay, so yeah, it's probably going to be a little bit smaller. I could cut this line down a little bit more. Maybe like this. Let's see what that's going to look like. Maybe like this, and I'll take it down a little bit more. So if I remember to cut the inside line, hopefully I'll remember that. Okay, so that gives me some guidelines. I think that'll work okay. It's going to give me this kind of a shape. So I'm just going to go ahead and do some cutting, okay? This is all improv, so just jump in and try, right? So I'm going to start here. All right. Ooh, first cut is the scariest, right? Isn't it? The first cut is the deepest, but when you're quilting, the first cut is the scariest because you're hoping you've measured things properly and, right, everything. So what I'm trying to do here is to make sure that I'm not cutting off any of those pieces altogether, right? That I'm not cutting so small that I actually lose some of the fabric. You can still see all the 4 fabrics here. And then this is the one where I'm going to cut a little bit and then change direction. Okay. And then we're going to come back here to finish off right there. All right. Here comes a moment of truth. That'll go for another crumb project. And there we are. So we just have a little bit here. We've got more over here. I mean, if I wanted to, I could actually trim. Maybe I'll trim that up a bit and just make it a bit different looking. Another angle, okay? But it gets me down, and you can see it's smaller than the other rows. So that's what I want to do. Now, if I was going to be piecing this into something, I'd be a little nervous because we've got not much more than a quarter, in some of these, but because it's applique, I don't have to worry about that at all, right? It is what it is, and that's what it is, okay? So let's take this back. I'm just going to work with this particular project here. Let's move everything out of the way. And let's take a look at this one so you can see what we're going to do now. So I've got my yellow rose there. Okay, I've got my little blue guy here, which I will press before I actually put it on. All right, but I could put him however I wanted to put him. I like to do things on a little bit of an angle sort of thing. So I could do that, and then I could figure out where I want to put these leaves. I might even put them over in the second border. If I did that, I would wait to stitch this down until I had quilted this, probably. Or I could quilt around it, but you need to be aware of that, what that may look like. Let's see, I've got, what, three of these. Okay, so let's try and do something like maybe this with that one, and then if I'm going to put this little guy over here somewhere, as I fuss with him. And I've got this big leaf. So this leaf I may take and just cut down a bit to suit the size of this guy, right? Or I could put him underneath like that, something like that. Whenever I am satisfied with my design, I'm just going to take a glue stick like this Elmer's glue stick. You look like up above or in the description below, and I'll have a link to this one. So this is purple, dries clear, but I would just use that to affix these down to my project. And then I will finish them off, maybe with a blanket stitch, maybe with a narrow zigzag, maybe I'll match the colors in the fabric, maybe I'll do something contrasting. That's the fun of doing applique. But that's how you make those little improv roses. And you can see that there's quite a different look to this one than there is to this one. I kind of like this one better. But even these other ones that I have here too look a little bit different as well. So yeah, you can just have fun with it. It's a great way to use up your scraps, and you can make as many or as few as you want for your project. So I could actually fill this whole thing up with a whole bunch of other, you know, little roses if I wanted to, right? Even that would be pretty. Oh boy, here I go overthinking again. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, give it a thumbs up. Be sure to share it with your quilting friends. And remember to subscribe and hit the bell so you'll be notified the next time I release a new video. And before you go, check out these other videos I've included just for you. For more helpful quilting information, be sure to go to my website at www.chatterboxquilts.com.